On December 16th, the UMD Recreational Sports Outdoor Program announced Tim Bates, the driving force behind the program, passed away. Bates was an educator, mentor, and outdoor enthusiast for many.
Now, Northern News Now's Hannah Morgan spoke with two of Bates' colleagues and friends and shares what it was like to know him. Hannah, what did you learn?
After talking not only to the people I interviewed for this story, but also to other members of the community about Bates, I learned he truly left a legacy behind, and one that can be found all throughout Duluth. In Lincoln Park, the Duluth Folk School stands, offering classes encouraging people to express their skills through handcrafting. Tim Bates co-founded the school, where he taught skills like woodworking.
But he could build anything. He could repair anything.
Carmel Dime Oribus is the director of the Duluth Folk School. She and Bates worked together for years.
He really thought hard about people, how to help people improve their lives and how to get them connected with themselves and with nature.
And Bates carried that same mission to UMD.
This building is the result of literally 15 years of Tim and I working.
Ken Gilbertson worked at UMD alongside Bates, teaching environmental and outdoor education. Gilbertson says he and Bates would teach classes underneath what they called the Learning Tree in Bagley Nature Area. Eventually, they were able to build the Bagley classroom.
Students loved him. We often hear how he was their favorite instructor.
Gilbertson says Bates was a master educator, but his legacy reaches beyond the classroom.
His mission was to teach people about nature and to build community,
leaving an impact on all those who knew him.
I considered him my brother.
I want him back.
Tim Bates' family is planning on having a memorial in the spring or summer, and his family is asking that instead of sending flowers, donate to the Outdoor Education Scholarship Program at UMD and to the Duluth Folk School. Reporting live in studio, I'm Hannah Morgan, Northern News Now.